With the amount of survival stories we cover, I didn't think that anything could shock me until I heard this case. For the most outrageous reason, this father and son were put through unbelievable horror, and in order to survive, this father had to dig himself out of an 18-inch deep grave with a slit throat and run to get justice for his son. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke Makenna. I am so thrilled to be able to bring you another story that has a partially happy ending. You know, with these survival stories, they had to go through so much. And in this case, there is a death that needed justice as well. But this is a story that really deserves to be told, so I hope that you stay and listen to Butch and Brett Boyer's story. I also want to thank our sponsor, Jackpot Wins. This is a free-to-play mobile slots game that is simply for entertainment. No actual money is being exchanged, but you get to use all of the mega slot machines that are new or ones that you know, and free games are added every week. I love that there are so many games on this app to play. You will seriously never run out of them. Jackpot players can actually get the jackpot in the first 10 spins with an 100% guarantee. It's not hard, so it just makes you want to play so much, and it's just so much fun and just something to do to get your mind off of everyday work. So if you want to download it, you can use my link or the QR code on the screen, and you can get 10 million free coins. Yes, that's right. 10 million to start off your game journey. You can go for the new player friendly Witchy Witch theme, or you can go for the more authentic casino slot machines, or you can play with other players in what is called Sweet Souvenir. There are also mini games such as Wheel Bonus and Fortune Ball, as well as many more. I especially love Wheel Bonus for how easy it is to play. And it is also Jackpot Win's 4th birthday, and they're celebrating by giving you an exclusive carnival pass to unlock so many surprises within the game. And look at this adorable bag, as well as a puzzle and a super soft blanket that I could literally snuggle all day long that they sent me. How adorable. So with my link or my QR code, you can download now and get 10 million free coins to start with. Now let's get into the story. So it was 2002 in Alabama, and the Boyer family lived in Phoenix City. Now this was Forrest Butch Boyer, a father who actually went by the name of Butch. He was 54 years old at the time, and he had a 12-year-old son named Brett. Butch was said to be a used car salesman. He was very good at what he did. Brett was in 6th grade, and he was known to be a very rambunctious boy, and he actually had a girlfriend that he had just taken to a Valentine's Day dance. However, the unthinkable would happen to these two, and on February 18th of 2002, in the very early morning hours, the Russell County Sheriff's Department was called to the scene of a crime. Now this was off of Highway 341 in Seal, about 20 minutes from Phoenix City, where a man had flagged down a vehicle driving by and was asking for help. When the police arrived, they found a man bleeding from his neck profusely. He was in a very bad state, and the deputy was actually heard on the dash cam footage, and you could actually hear and watch that footage as of today, so I will add that in.
Come here. The ambulance is here, sir. Hold on. Right there.
My boys were shot 3 times.
Okay. Hold on, sir. Hold on. All right. Hold on, sir. Hold on. Okay, ambulance is here.
I'll get my boys first.
All right. All right, sir, hold on real quick. What's your name? Butch. Butch what?
Boyer.
Spell it.
B-O-Y-E-R. B-O-W-Y-E-R.
What's your name, sir? I mean, what's your birthday?
3/2/47.
Okay, he said his son's been shot 3 times down there, been buried. We're gonna have to take him down there. Who shot you? Who did this?
Jim Brooks.
Brooks?
It's not Jim. It's not a dad. It's a son. It's a right. It's in the grave.
Hey, Lon? No bullshit. I got a man, his throat's been cut to hell. He said his son's been shot 3 times, is buried in a grave down here at Uchi, and he wants to go get him. He was buried and dug himself out. This is a bad one. Hey, sir, what is your address?
2301 Lakewood Drive.
2301 what?
Lakewood Drive. I'm right across from the golf course. They might be back in there trying to get some more money.
Now, Butch was eventually rushed to the hospital where he had to undergo surgery for his injuries. Where his throat had been slashed, it was ear to ear and it was deep. He did not even want to go to the hospital at first because he wanted to make sure that they were going for his son before he would get in that ambulance. So at this point, Butch was able to tell the police what had happened that night that had led to the murder of his son and his near-death experience. And he said that around 10 p.m., that Sunday, February 17th, his son was about to take a shower. He was getting ready for bed. Butch was working on the kitchen table, and they were just having a normal night routine, and that is when somebody knocked on the door, and he knew that this was quite strange. He normally didn't have visitors at this time, but when he opened the door, he saw what appeared to be an officer who claimed to be a narcotics officer who also had a piece of paper that was a search warrant and a warrant for his arrest. Now, once inside, because obviously Butch let them inside, that is when the officer arrested him for drug possession, and the officers would handcuff Butch. And then Butch was telling his son, who was still awake and still there, that this was not something that he had done, that everything was going to be okay. And that's when Butch asked the officers, what am I supposed to do about my son? He, was only 12. Is he going to have to stay here alone? And so that is when the officers actually handcuffed Brett and put both Brett and Butch into this vehicle, which was a white Ford Crown Victoria with a security shield between the front and the back. This looked like a very normal police vehicle, and so they were driven to a remote road, and this was where a construction site was. People were actually working on the road, but no one was there at that time. And Butch began to be asked by these men, because there was one that came to his door and then there was one in the car already. So Butch was being asked by these two men about his safe. They were demanding his money, and so he told them, okay, you can have my money. So they went back to his home, and they would end up getting $47,000 of his savings, as well as a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver that was actually his housekeeper's, that didn't belong to him. But that is when Butch and Brett were forced back into the car. They went back to the construction site at a slightly different area, and Butch was then taken from the car away from his son, where these men would cut his throat with a knife. One then sat on him and told him to go to sleep, and they would eventually shove him into a grave that they dug in front of them. Butch said that he pretended to be dead because he knew that he was either dying or fixing to die. Now at this time, his son was still outside with the men, and that is when Butch would hear gunshots, and suddenly his son's body was thrown into the grave as well. Now, this is where some of the stories differ, because some say that Butch was thrown in first, his son on top of him. Others say that his son was thrown in and then Butch was afterwards. But the men would begin to bury them in the dirt before leaving, and for the next 10 to 15 minutes, Butch would be digging himself out of this 18-inch deep grave that they had been buried alive in. Except for he didn't know whether his son was alive or dead in those moments. He was just digging, and he removed himself as well as his son's body and ended up crawling through the woods, walking down the road, and getting help. Like I said, when the ambulance arrived, Butch was in a very bad condition, yet he would not budge until they promised to go and check out his son to see if he had any signs of life. Brett's body was found. The officer said that they walked up to a little boy in jeans lying there, bloodied and muddied, and this grave was next to him. Since Butch was able to give a description of the car that they were kidnapped in, the search did begin for this car, but that's not all he gave, because Butch also knew the name of one of the men, Jim Brooks, or Jimmy Brooks Jr. Now, he recognized this man, Jim Brooks, because this was someone that he knew from his car dealership, and they had worked together, but Butch didn't want him to know that he actually knew him and could identify him, so he kept quiet. So investigators had the car, and they also had a possible suspect that was identified by the survivor. And by the next day, the vehicle was actually stopped, But inside was not Jim Brooks. This was a 43-year-old man named Michael Carruth, and he was driving, and so he was arrested and taken into custody for questioning, and they actually found $22,900 in cash on him, as well as this black patch, like for clothing, that had the word agent on it. Now, 22-year-old Jimmy Brooks was then found, I believe, at his home and arrested as well, but it was found that these two men, Michael and Jimmy, were not strangers either. Michael had actually posted a $35,000 bail to get Jim out of jail 6 months prior to that. He was in jail for breaking and entering motor vehicles, and they didn't have the money to get out. And so Michael had gotten him out of jail in that time, and at the time of his arrest, Jimmy was actually going to go in and sign the next day the plea deal that had been worked out for that case. But now he was being arrested for murder. Butch would identify both Michael and Jim as his attackers, and the motive was quickly uncovered with the interrogations, because it turned out that Jim had gone to Butch's house prior to this night with his father, who was in the repossession business, and they were working with Butch, and Jim Jr. would see Jim Sr. and Butch exchanging cash, and this made him hatch the idea that Butch had a lot of cash at his home and he was going to steal it. And so he reached out to his friend, Michael, who was this bail bondsman. And together, they would end up not only finishing this plan, but actually acting it out. Jimmy, in these interviews, immediately told investigators that he was going to be straight up. He was going to tell them everything. He said that he believed that since Butch survived, Butch was going to kill him. He then went into what happened after Michael got him out of jail, that there was a lot more to the story than they even knew. Because you see, the attack on Brett and Butch was not the first time that these two had murdered together.
Okay, so I'm trying to do good when I first get out. I'm doing construction, framing and stuff, but I'm paying my lawyer and my bad check I had in Columbus. I wasn't able to pay Mike Carruth, alright? And it had been like maybe 3 months I went down the road, and he come up to me and all, he's like, Jenny, well, I need you to start paying me. He says, if you don't, I'm going to have to lock you back up. I says, man, look, I'm sorry, I'm doing the best I can right now. He says, well, he says, if I work something other up, something other that you can get you some money on, he says, I'll come and get you and mention it to you. If you like it, we'll do it. And he comes up, he says, I want you to ride with me. I said, okay. We get in the car and we ride, you know, just a little bit of small talk. He's more or less like, you ready to make some money?
So where are y'all riding?
In his Crown Vic, and we're just mostly just driving in Phoenix City area. Right?
Okay.
You know, I guess he felt safe in his car to talk. He says, well, he was mentioning it about, well, where can we get a lot of money at? He says, well, we'll just bust up in there and just some ski masks. Just hold them down. We just take the money and leave. Seen the house and all. We come by, looked at it, you know. See, this is that other guy I was also telling you about, James.
James.
Okay, see, he involved him on that when I started mentioning the place. He went and got him. And when he got him, it was more or less like a little crew, a little team we had going on that day. And we looked at the place, filled it out. He washed his car up real good. He was all getting it all ready and everything. And he was telling us how to do it. You know, watch out for hair falling off, you know, get you a good bath first. Wear your long sleeve shirts. He said they'll do all DNA tests, you know, they'll suck up the carpet from off the floor, you know, and find out everything. He says, be real careful what you do. He's like, wear you some shoes you don't usually wear. They'll be putting footprints and all that and figuring out, trying to find your shoes and matching it up to the prints in the dirt.
Mike is.
Mike's telling me all this. And so he makes us get out and gives us a walkie-talkie, and he's got one too. And 2 clicks for his trouble, and 1 click for trouble, 2 clicks for him to come back to get us.
So he drove off.
He gave us and handed us back the guns and shit because I guess he didn't want us to hold them in the car, you know. Both of them just got out of jail not long ago or whatever. And he handed them back to us. He's like, alright y'all, he said, when you do your 2 clicks, I'll come back and get y'all right here at this spot. And we asked him what the problem was, why didn't he come with us? And he's talking, that he didn't want to leave the car, and it's his car, And so we go ahead, we didn't have no choice. There was no backing out of it once we did all that. We go in there, kick the door down, do our little thing there, get the money from the place, and we leave, click it, he comes back, picks us up, pops his trunk.
Back up. What happened inside? How do you get in?
The back door.
Did you kick it in? Did they come to the back door?
No, see what I did, we got it to the back of the place, cut the phone line.
Okay.
Jenny cut the phone line. As soon as we went up to the door, he opened up the screen door and I kicked the door in. Go in there, get them down on the ground, get them, tell us where the money is. But when we got up in there, both got on the ground, hysterical as hell. I keep having nightmares, that's why she was mad, like tossing and turning and shit in the bed. And got him on the ground, was asking where the money was.
Jane says, I'll stay here with him, you take her in the back and get the money.
Right. He tried to shoot the dude in the ass. He hit him in the fucking right here. And so I get the woman up and take her in the back. When we take her in the back, I asking her where the money is, and she's about to give it to me. And as soon as she reaches down to get it, she tries to grab a little revolver out from there and swing it around on me. And she almost fucking shot my head off. I shot her. I did not want to kill him. It was my very first person, Yeah. I eventually wound up doing it while he's just sitting there arguing with me. Fucking do it, motherfucker, do it. And once I did, and he walked in there and he popped the dude that was in the living room laying on the floor, right there in the living room.
So you popped her where?
I popped her in the head.
You shot her in the head? Back of the head, front of the head? It's okay. You're getting it off your chest.
I just know I'm going to get dead. That's all.
68-year-old Thurman Ratliff and 62-year-old Catherine Ratliff had been murdered in their home on January 30th. They had a daughter named Katrina who would call them every single morning, and she couldn't get a hold of them that morning, and so by lunch she was so worried that she went to their home and found her parents deceased. She also found that the phone lines were cut, the home was ransacked, and she ran to the neighbor to call the police. Both of these parents had been shot multiple times, and this was in the neighboring town of Palica, about 34 minutes away from Phoenix City. Now, in this case, the suspect that the police were going after at first was the daughter Katrina's ex-husband Norman Herbert, because after they divorced, he actually kidnapped Katrina, beat her, sexually assaulted her, and was eventually caught, but continued to threaten the family after this. However, it was quickly found that he was in jail at the time of these murders and he couldn't be the killer. Investigators did not know what happened until Jimmy confessed. But the other man that Jimmy spoke of that had done this with him was found to be a 27-year-old named James Edward Gary. All three of these men were now being charged with their double homicide. But investigators had begun to piece the cases together after the murder of Brett due to the eerily similar home invasion that led to murder. Jimmy claimed that he told Michael about Butch and about his money, and Michael actually said he knew Butch and that would be the perfect idea.
He said that he wanted to go do one more thing so he can get that where he can have enough to make his little old place that he was wanting to. And I was telling him that I was broke, and he's like, look, he says, we're not going to do nobody. He says, all we're going to do is I'm going to walk up there, and I'm going to show him these little pieces of paper saying that this is what I was telling you earlier. Look on his computer. He said he kind of erased it out of his computer, but I don't believe it. But he made copies of Al Green when he made one of them search warrants, or some kind of piece of paper saying, searching the place, this, that, and the other. And he blanked it all out, put State of Alabama versus Butch Bowery, and put down there on the rest to search your house and every contents in your safe, lolly dog. And he goes up, knocks on the dude's door, because he went to Ranger Joe's to get a little patch that says agent, you know, he's got a drug enforcement hat. He went and bought a long sleeve shirt, you know, dark blue, looks like a cop.
But Michael Carruth's statement during his interrogation wasn't really a confession or much of a statement at all. You see, he was adamant that he never harmed anybody and that he was willing to take a polygraph test and even wear a wire to expose other criminals in the city or in the town if they could come to an agreement between the police and him that would make it so that he could either go free, be on probation, basically get away with what he did to Butch and Brett. But blood was found on Michael's clothing when he was arrested, and after being sent in for testing, it was a match to Butch.
I'm a walking dead man. What I want is I want federal witness protection, and I will walk away from everybody I know and I care about.
The district attorney was saying that if this could happen to Butch Boyer, it could happen to anyone, and that's why it was so frightening to the community. Jimmy was found to have completed 9th grade. He went on to get a GED. At the time, he was living with his fiance and his mother, but he actually got kicked out of the apartment during this time, and he was living kind of with Michael, under Michael's thumb. And Michael was working as this bail bondsman at his wife's business. And he was also building a marijuana growing operation, though he was in need of money to fully start this. But on May 29th of 2002, Michael would plead not guilty. The defense claimed that Michael had no significant prior criminal history and did not shoot Brett, nor did he possess the murder weapon, that this was all on Jimmy. They claimed that due to this, he should not be sentenced to death as they were predicting, especially, they said, because he didn't have any family members who could testify on his behalf. Now, at Jimmy's trial, the judge would end up saying the defendant and his accomplice laughed and joked as they threw dirt on the dead child and his father. It was pretty certain at that point that they were going to get the maximum punishment, especially because Butch actually testified at these trials, leaving the jurors in tears. He said that once he and his son were in the car, they drove past the sheriff's office, and Butch immediately was asking why they didn't turn in to the office, and Michael told him that they were going to meet somebody down the road. He was also on the phone at this point, and that is when they pulled into this construction site, and they started blinking the headlights as though they were signaling to someone. And that is when they took Butch away from his son and demanded that he tell them where his safe with $100,000 in it was. But he didn't have this safe or this kind of money, but he did tell them where the money he had was. As they headed back, Butch was trying to negotiate with them, saying, "I will give you more money. I will find as much money as possible if you will let us go." And they seemed to agree. When they headed back to the construction site, Butch was actually pulled out of the car by Michael first, who would just nick his throat and then said, "That's sharp, isn't it?" about the knife. Butch was then shoved to the ground and Michael slit his throat. And Michael was then the one to sit on top of him, saying to be quiet and go to sleep. Brett was then brought over to see his father bleeding on the ground, and Michael and Jimmy began interrogating Brett about this safe and where all the money was. And Brett was just asking the men not to hurt his dad, but they told him that he needed to be worried about himself. Jimmy then got down at the level of the already bleeding Butch and cut his throat again. Butch and Brett then watched as the men dug their grave. Then Butch heard Michael tell Jim, "I've done one, now you do one." And Butch said that he then had to witness his son's execution, as Jim pointed the gun at his son's head and shot. His son then began to gurgle, and Jim said, "This little MF doesn't want to die." He then shot him 2 more times, which caused him to fall into this grave. Now, like I said, there are differing sources on who fell in first. Butch would say that the men then debated on shooting him as well, but they didn't want to cause any more attention to be brought to them by another gunshot, so they thought that, he wouldn't survive anyway, and then they pushed him in as well. Michael and Jim allegedly joked and laughed as they buried them, and at this point, the judge actually demanded that the courtroom take a 10-minute break from this testimony due to how gruesome it was. Everyone was crying and one juror refused to return. Butch would then say that when he dug himself out, he found the leg of his son to pull him out as well. and he would quickly realize that his son was already gone. That is when he ran for justice. Jimmy Brooks and Michael Carruth were both sentenced to death for Brett's murder and the attempted murder of Butch. Michael's defense claimed that Michael shed a lot of tears about Brett's murder and that he was remorseful. Brett's cousin was asked if he could talk to Michael and, say anything or ask anything what it would be, and he said, "I wouldn't say anything. I'd strangle him." He said he also watched Michael sit there in the courtroom with no emotion at all, even though his defense was saying that he was so emotional. Now, in 2005, the murders of the Ratliff couple was taken to court, and the third man that helped in those murders, James Edward Gary, would be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and Michael and Jimmy were later given life sentences as well. Since then, Butch has been known to visit the last school that his son attended. He's always going and checking on everybody, and a multi-purpose building at the school was even dedicated to Brett in 2004. There's also a plaque in his memory that says, "The light in his face will forever shine on ours. His spirit will always live with us." The sheriff has said that Butch always talks about his son and the things that he wishes that his son could have done and grown up to do. But a friend of Butch's said that if Butch did not survive that night, we may never know what had happened to him or to Brett. That as hard as it is for this father to live without his son and to know he couldn't save his son even though he did everything he could, he is the reason his son got justice, and he was so strong in doing so. I mean, I can't even imagine being buried alive, for one, but also knowing that you're bleeding profusely, you could pass at any moment, not knowing if the person with you is dead or alive, having to dig out, and then also having to go get help on your own and to talk to the police and to try to get all of this solved before you yourself succumb to your wounds. He is just one of the strongest people I have ever heard of, and that strength, I think, all came from his need, his want to help his son, whether that be to save his life, that he wasn't really deceased, or whether to get him justice. I truly hope that Brett is resting in peace, and it makes me so sad that this 12-year-old boy had to go through this. And the reasoning for this being that money that the father may have had, and they had this random amount in their head that they thought that he had. He didn't even have that much. They had no proof that he had that much. It was just all so ridiculous and horrific. But the fact that the murders that happened a few months prior got to be solved by this case as well, I think it just shows you how much of an impact the survivor had and that Brett had, because of Brett, even though he should have been able to survive as well, and we all wish that was the outcome, he ended up solving 2 unsolved murders and got the daughter of those parents to be able to finally have some peace knowing what had happened. It does appear through the interviews, and you can give me your own opinion, that Michael was more of the mastermind, even though he was adamant that he stayed in the car, that he had nothing to do with it, that he was just the driver and didn't know what he was doing when he dropped them off. I tend to believe the survivor who claimed that Michael was the one who would end up slitting his throat and then telling Jimmy to shoot Brett, though I don't think that takes any of the blame away from Jimmy, who shot a 12-year-old boy 3 times. Jimmy said in the interview that he didn't know that his son was coming, that wasn't the plan, that they thought the son was going to be asleep so he would wake up and not know that his father was kidnapped, just know that his father was missing and that they wouldn't be dealing with the son, but the son was awake and so they brought him. But they did not have to do that. They did not have to do any of this, but they could have left that boy there. Have you heard of this case before? Because I just came across it and was just mind blown by the entire thing. I just wish Butch the best, and I know that he is probably going through so much on a daily basis, and I hope that he allows himself to heal even just a little bit, and I hope that he never blames himself, and I hope that he never has to go through those thoughts of what if I did this, what if I did that. He did everything possible, everything. And Brett didn't deserve that. But Butch can continue to live on and spread his legacy, and I think that's exactly what he's doing, and it is so beautiful to see. So keep them in your hearts and leave some nice comments down below if any of their family members were to see this. But don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay.